we're going to start off with some special presentations. And we have our first one has to do with the Ohio water contamination. I believe we've got Tim here and Edwin. You come to the podium, introduce yourselves, and kind of give us an idea of how you can educate us a little bit.
Good evening, Mayor Moeller, members of City Council, community. My name is Edwin Porter. I'm the Executive Director of Infrastructure for the City of Hamilton. So as all are aware, the City of Hamilton owns and operates our drinking water system. And our division of utility operations is responsible for the groundwater, getting the water out of the ground, and then also disinfecting the water at our 2 treatment plants in the city. Our division of engineering is responsible for the engineering and capital project implementation in our distribution system, and our public works team is responsible for the maintenance of our distribution system. But as we are aware of the chemical spill in East Palestine, Ohio, we were of course aware that it occurred and understood very quickly how it could or could not affect the City of Hamilton drinking water supply. But as many city officials, I know members of City Council, and were contacted by the community and they expressed their concerns about the drinking water, we felt it would be important to have a special presentation just to discuss at a high level where our drinking water source comes from, the monitoring of that drinking water source, as well as why we're not concerned with the chemical spill contaminating our drinking water supply. So in 1967, Hamilton was a founding member of something called the Hamilton-New Baltimore Groundwater Consortium. This is a partnership that we have, and the program is designed to protect the area's source water from pollution and overuse. And with us today is Tim McClellan. Tim is the manager of the Groundwater Consortium, and he's been with them for 22 years. So I'm going to turn it over to Tim to go through a presentation. There you go, Tim.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Edwin, and thank you, members of council and Mayor Moeller, for the invite here. I'm going to jump right into this because I know I have about 10 or 15 minutes, and it's going to be difficult for me because I can talk about water all night long, as Tim and everybody else up here knows. So I'm going to jump right into this, introduce you to who the Groundwater Consortium is. It's 7 large public water suppliers and users in the Hamilton to New Baltimore, which is in northern Coleraine Township area. We actually extend up into the Trenton area. We've been together for, well, actually 5 of the 7 members have been together for 57 years before Ohio EPA, US EPA even formed. Members of the Groundwater Consortium include the City of Hamilton, of course, City of Fairfield, Cincinnati Waterworks, Southwest Regional Water District, Butler County Water and Sewer, Molson Coors, and Southwest Ohio Water Company. Tonight I'm going to focus on City of Hamilton and a couple aspects of our program. Basically, what is source water? It's surface water or streams, rivers, or lakes. And in our case, groundwater aquifers that serve as drinking water in our region. Source water provides water for public drinking water supplies and private wells throughout this region. Members of the Groundwater Consortium pump on average about 62 million gallons of water per day from the aquifer. There's an example of one of Hamilton's wells off to the right. Drinking water protection areas, which we have established in this region across several jurisdictional boundaries. We serve over 315,000 water customers, several hundred businesses with the groundwater in this region. So it's very, very important to a lot of different companies and cities. Molson Coors established here because of this water source. These are all the components of our source water protection program. I wish I could get into all of these tonight, but I'm going to focus on the 2 that are highlighted there, groundwater monitoring and contingency planning, for the sake of what happened a couple weeks ago up in the east part of Ohio. Obviously, everybody here has probably heard of the East Palestine, Ohio train derailment. This was a tragedy in this community of about 4,500 people. This train derailment has impacted water and soils up in this area of Ohio. Tonight I'm going to talk about currently what's happening there. I'm not going to get into all of the details because I know a lot of people have heard on the news what's happening. They have tested the water in that community. All 5 production wells that they have that are groundwater wells up there So far, things are non-detect. It's only been 2 weeks from this contamination incident, so there's that possibility that that contamination could get down into their drinking water wells in time. Let's hope it doesn't. Everything has been non-detect up to this point. Doesn't mean that the private wells and the private well owners in that region have non-detections. They have to sample their water on their own. They'll probably be reimbursed by the railroad company for those tests. Basically, they're currently excavating contaminated soil. I heard the other day on the news it was over 3,500 cubic yards of contaminated soil they've removed. What this does is minimize groundwater impact by removing that contaminated soil so that over time when there's precipitation it doesn't carry that contamination down into the water table. They'll be installing wells. They haven't announced that, but I'm certain they'll be installing wells for a long-term monitoring period for the next likely decade or more. So one of the things I was a little frustrated with over the past couple of weeks is the misleading information on a lot of social media outlets, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. I almost had to stop looking at that stuff, but I couldn't help it because people were sending me messages. This is a pretty well-known map at this point in time. This was a map that was used to provide misleading information. For example, on the left, this was a tweet by somebody saying East Palestine sits almost at the very beginning of the Ohio River Basin aquifer. That is not an aquifer. That would be the largest aquifer in the country if that were actually an aquifer. That's an actual drainage basin for the Ohio River. So that's the first thing that popped out to me. A lot of people didn't really pay attention to that particular tweet in terms of what it meant to me. But on the right, the yellow shaded area, somebody wrote that if you live in that yellow shaded area, don't drink the water, don't risk it. So it confused a lot of people in the state of Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana. Every single consortium member had phone calls. A lot of council people and mayors had a lot of questions to address. And obviously a lot of you have heard about Cincinnati Waterworks and the work that they've done on the Ohio River to minimize the risk to their water customers. So in fact, this is the river drainage basin for the Ohio River. This area is where all the water in the green area drains to. So the Ohio River is the lowest elevation in that region. So any water that's draining into creeks, rivers, and streams ultimately will end up on that blue line, which is the Ohio River. One of the other misleading bits of information was that everybody that's in the green area gets their water from the Ohio River. That's not the case here in Butler County or at the city of Hamilton and at many, well, I'll say hundreds of other water systems in that green area. So these are actually real maps online available to the public. This was put out by, I think it was the Army Corps of Engineers, but also Orsenco, an organization that works with the Ohio River water systems, has a map like this. But this map shows you where all the watersheds are and how they're disconnected with one another in most cases, but they all ultimately end up emptying water into the Ohio River. Basically, there's a definition of what a watershed is. It basically sheds the water off of the upper lying areas into the creeks and streams and ultimately into the Ohio River. I have this slide up on the right. Miami Conservancy District has this map on their website. The green area on the right in that map is basically the same darker green area on the left side of that slide, that map. So if you can see where Cincinnati is located just to the north, that is the Great Miami Watershed. So within that watershed is where our aquifer is, and that's where the blue lines are on the right side of that map. So just for clarification. One thing I want to point out, I wish I had a pointer, but the star on the map to the left is where the East Palestine train derailment was. And of course you see the darker green colored watershed area, which is where our watershed is, but also where our groundwater is located. So we're very, very disconnected from this event, and unfortunately for their town, they got a long road ahead of them for cleanup and water resource management there. So not all rain or snow that falls on the surface of the ground ends up in a watershed. Some of it goes into the ground and becomes groundwater over time. And of course, that's where we get our water supply, our drinking water supply. The Great Miami River, the Great Miami Berry Valley Aquifer supplies water to our region, to the city of Hamilton. And it's basically what's called an unconfined aquifer, meaning that there's no defining or confining layer at the shallow part of the aquifer protecting us from anything on the surface of the ground. So we do have to work hard to protect this area because it'll just leach right down into our water supply potentially if there's spills and releases, which I'll talk a little bit more about. So here's a basic aquifer cross section. So our aquifer is sand and gravel, so anyone in construction services, anyone that's ever built a house in this region will know that you get down in the sand pretty quick in this area. So that's part of the aquifer system. The aquifer goes about 200 feet deep. In some areas it's as deep as 240. Some areas it's as shallow as 30 feet. I'll talk a little bit about where that aquifer is, but water moves between the sand and gravel particles and ultimately ends up in our drinking water production wells from pumps, and we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a second. So I did talk more about the Ohio River drainage basin than I wanted to. I'll talk about our aquifer and where we get our water from. The good news is we're far enough away from that incident that it will not impact us. Hamilton uses groundwater for drinking water, not surface water as our source. Hamilton's wells and our water system is a really unique system, and here are the reasons why. Hamilton owns two separate drinking water plants, both on opposite sides of town. They basically can back each other up, and that's a good water system. Very few water systems have that ability to have two different water systems that are still connected. Hamilton has a really diverse well field. All their wells, most of their wells are spread out throughout the community. They're not all clustered like some other well fields where you have a cluster of wells. If there's contamination, they could all be impacted. So Hamilton has different areas of the well field they can pump from. Hamilton has a sustainable, safe drinking water source, and they were founding members of our organization 57 years ago. So this is a general map of what our Butler County water resources look like, groundwater in particular. So where you see purple and blue on this map is where groundwater is located. Everywhere you see orange on this map is shale, bedrock, and clay. You're not going to get much groundwater from there. All of Hamilton's wells are in the purple and blue areas. That area, if you look at that map, this is kind of an older map. It's the only one that's been developed as a Butler County water resources map. But it says you can pump 500 or more gallons of water per minute. Most of Hamilton's wells are anywhere from 2,500 to 3,000 gallons of water per minute out of one individual well. So that's why we're able to pump 62 million gallons of water every day out of the aquifer. And in a lot of cases, in the summertime, it can be over 100 million. And that's all the consortium members combined. That's how much water comes out of the aquifer. And again, I'll get into the details of the sustainability of that. It's very important that we monitor that over time. So diving in a little bit deeper, we have what are called source water protection areas, a 1, a 5, and a 10-year time of travel zone. The time it takes for a particle of water to move underground towards our drinking water production wells. This is all based on scientific information that we collected over the last couple of decades to understand and model this area. So we're very precise with this, and it's defensible in court. We've had to use this in court a couple of times, but it's good information for us to know where our most sensitive areas of the drinking water aquifer are. These are not contaminant time of travel zones, and you might have heard about the Ohio River and the Cincinnati Waterworks and Norsenko calculating the time it was going to take for that water to move towards their intakes. It's the same concept, except in groundwater, it's a little bit slower because groundwater only moves about 12 inches per day, not very far, versus a river that it'll take minutes or hours to get to an intake. So these are the time of travel zones depicted over top of an aerial. To give you reference, the Bob Meyer Airport is up there to the right. The water travels for miles away towards these drinking water production wells. The red in that red area is called the 1-year time of travel zone. The blue is called the 5-year time of travel zone, and the gray shaded area is the 10-year time of travel zone. This is the area for Fairfield and Hamilton well fields. They're kind of interspersed amongst one another. Off to the far left is Southwest Regional Water District. They're 1, 5, and 10-year time of travel zone. Lower left-hand corner is Greater Cincinnati Waterworks, Bolton well field, their backup water supply for their surface water system. So one of the most important components of our work includes a comprehensive monitoring program. The program is designed to provide early warning of contamination and water level information. We've collected this information over 20 years. We kind of have an idea of what's in our source water before it gets to the production wells. This is an example of what one of the smaller monitoring wells look like. It's useful for collecting groundwater samples, measuring the depth of water. Consortium wells are mostly what are called stick-up variety. I know some of you are familiar with Grismer Park on the corner of St. Clair and River Road. At that location, we have a couple of stick-up wells off to the right, and there's a little sign that talks about what those are. We also have monitoring wells in Benninghofen Park and other locations where we have access to easy access to get to collect those samples. So this diagram kind of takes a cut out of the earth to show you what those monitoring wells do. Typically we have them in a nested area, so it'll be a shallow, a medium, and a deep well together. So that if we do see groundwater contamination migrating towards a production well, we'll pick it up in one of those monitoring wells and be able to shut off that production well in the event of a incident that we see. And sometimes natural groundwater can have some contaminants in it. For the most part, most of our wells are showing up as non-detect in terms of the different types of samples we collect. So this map, again, looking over top, the blue dots that you see are the early warning monitoring wells, the smaller wells. The white dots on this map represent production wells for the city of Hamilton, Fairfield, Cincinnati Waterworks. So we've strategically located these monitoring wells in these areas to give us an early warning of contamination towards the production wells. And this is the North Wellfield area where basically the North Wellfield is up by New Miami Village. You can see again the blue areas are the monitoring wells. The white are the production wells, and they're all designed to provide us with early warning of the potential for contamination. Currently, we have 43 consortium monitoring wells throughout the region. We look at that every year to see if new wells should be added, if other wells are not useful anymore. We test for hundreds of different kinds of contaminants that potentially could be in our aquifer. We do this twice a year. Again, groundwater doesn't move very quickly. In some areas, we do it quarterly where we know there's some contamination. We evaluate surface water quality on the Great Miami River at 6 locations on a quarterly basis, and we try to correlate that data with the shallow wells to see if there's material coming from the river through the shallow depths of the aquifer. We coordinate our efforts with Ohio Department of Natural Resources, Miami Conservancy District, and United States Geological Survey on water level information. We have access to several hundred wells throughout the community in the event of an emergency if we have to monitor water quality. So protecting groundwater quality, we monitor long-term chemical trends. We identify and eliminate potential sources of contamination. There's a frequent and consistent sampling process that we use. We basically evaluate the changes and try to deal with those changes as early as possible. We collect monthly water levels on a monthly basis, have for the past 20 years, to basically understand, the pumping areas and how fast our aquifer recharges from pumping in a certain area. We get calls from time to time about drought conditions and what's happening out west with water levels dropping significantly over time because of drought. Our aquifer responds fairly quickly. We're very fortunate to have about 40 inches of rain per year recharging our aquifer. So as far as contingency planning goes, even with source water protection, contamination can still occur due to leak spills, illegal discharges, and other activities in and around the source water protection areas. The consortium's contingency plan is over 30 pages long, identifies procedures for responding to source water protection related emergencies in the time of travel zones. The consortium members work with Butler County EMA to plan for incidents such as train derailments. In fact, just a couple of months ago, we had a tabletop exercise up in Trenton on a train derailment. Members of the Groundwater Consortium have excellent working relationships with the state agency, Ohio EPA, and first responders in the region. Members work together to identify risks around the region yearly. We meet monthly. The members are also very fortunate to have Hamilton City Council and senior staff here support the efforts to protect your drinking water. We have signs like this around the community. We'd like to put up more. but that's just my personal opinion. So there's my information. I'm happy to address any questions from council or the audience about our drinking water.
Any questions from council for Tim? I just want to say thank you for continuing to educate not just young people, because you've got the young people events, but educating us
Yep.
here this evening. And so the passage of time, I mean, it's going to go on for a decade of monitoring.
Or more, yes.
Or more.
Or more, yes. Yeah, it's a tragedy for that community. Hopefully they can address the contamination in the soil quick enough. If they can dig down deep enough where the saturated soil is with the contamination before it gets to the water table, that would be the best case scenario. I know that there's been a lot of videos about the creeks being impacted, and yes, they are. There's been, I think, 3,500 fish counted by the Ohio Department of Natural Resources that were killed in some of the streams in the nearby area. And all of you heard about the material moving down the Ohio River at what is classified as low levels, but to anyone in this room, a low level means it's there, and that's a concern. That makes total sense. But the type of contaminant that was in the river was at like a 5 part per billion. For it to be harmful to the most sensitive subpopulation, which would be a developing fetus, it would have to be about 560 part per billion. Even though that's all accurate, true, that stuff was still in the Ohio River, still a concern to everybody along the Ohio River. And Cincinnati Waterworks did shut off their intakes just as a precaution. I can tell you that City of Hamilton, some of the other consortium members have turned off wells that are close to the Great Miami River when we hear about spills, just as a precaution. So we do have a good network of communication among all the consortium members. City of Hamilton's North Well Field would be the first impacted if there's a spill on the Great Miami River, and inducing that infiltration of groundwater into the well field would be catastrophic. And of course, we do have some trains that roll through the town here, and this could happen anywhere. So.
Well, you mentioned city staff. I see John Bowie out there.
Yeah. Oh,
I
actually,
don't see John around too often, but I know he's working. I know he's working.
I wanted to make sure I wanted to point out a great big thanks to the guys here at the water plant for coming tonight to support me. Can't say enough about where my office is, and I do get to interact with the water production folks down there who make your water great, best in the world. And it's amazing to me. I was thinking about this on the ride home the other night, how many resources go into producing great water, not just at the water plant, in the distribution system, all the engineers that work on things, senior staff, council that supports it, financial people that put together budgets. It's amazing how water works. It's not just, turning on a switch and the water comes out your faucet. It's not that simple, but I do appreciate the support from council and from all the guys at the Hamilton Water Plant. You guys have a great system.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilmember Nab.
Tim, it's been a pleasure to know you for so many years. And
I love all the Tims on this side of the room.
the fact that the comprehensive testimony you've just given and the expert manner that you're able to deliver what you know to be true in things, because many of us have fielded those calls you mentioned earlier, and people concerned because of some of the innuendo, some of the not true statements that you shared that were out there for people to watch and see and things like that. So again, we really appreciate your sharing so much of what you know to be true, and as you said, you just kind of tapped the surface for us. Thank you.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Happy to come back and talk about other aspects of our program, especially the education piece. October 6th, everybody write the date down. That's the Children's Water Festival, and I expect Mayor Moeller to come back and make his presence. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks.
Appreciate it. Hey, John, did you bring somebody else with you today?
Yeah, Jay Mosley
Okay.
and Sharon Bridges, administrative assistant, water plant.
Great. Thank you for what you folks do.